Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to add text to our scene. So this is something we might have seen before, but in our video, we're going to be looking at how to add the text elements. We're going to be looking at a little bit more in depth as we can scale and position the text and what the tools are to do so. And we're going to be using the UI mode, the specific UI mode in Unity to position our elements and to see the difference between a normal move mode and the UI mode. So let's get started. So right now I've got a bunch of scenes in my Unity game. I'm going to start with the start scene, and you can see as soon as I double click it, the name of my scene appears at the top of my window on the title bar. So now I'm in the start scene. I want to add some text. And how do I add some text? Well, you've probably done it before in a previous section, but let's go over it again. You go to Game Object, UI, and Text. And that will bring in quite a few things to your game. And you can see it straight away. In your hierarchy, you'll see there's a canvas, a text element that is inside the canvas, and an event system. So it'll bring three things. So there are three different things brought in for some text. So now let's go over them one by one and take a look at what they mean. So firstly, we take a look at the canvas. So I've just double-clicked my canvas, and you can see it appear on screen. And this is my canvas right here. Now you'll notice that there's a quite big difference between the canvas and the main camera. If I click on the main camera and we look at the inspector on the right hand side, we can see it has a transform component, which has a position, a rotation, and a scale. Pretty standard stuff, and then some camera specific things. Now if I click on my canvas, you will see that the canvas has some canvas specific things like the renderer and the scaler, etc. But it also has a different type of transform. It has what's called a rect transform. And that's part of this UI system, is that the UI system has a different type of transform that allows us much more control over the positioning of our elements in a UI system, in a menu, or in a physical UI in the world space. So that's the first thing we need to notice. The second thing we need to notice is that the canvas has what's called a render mode. Now, the render mode is about how the canvas is rendered on the scene. And right now we've got it as screen space overlay. So if you look at the inspector, you've got the canvas component, it has a screen space render mode property or attribute, and it will have screen space overlay, screen space camera, and world space. Right now we're not going to worry too much about what they mean. We can keep it in screen space overlay, and that basically screen space overlay means the canvas will be rendered on top of everything just before the screen is shown to the user. So when the engine renders the scene, it'll start rendering all the objects within the scene, etc., etc. And then at the very final step, it'll render the canvas on top of that as an overlay on the screen and not on the scene, and then that will be shown to the user. So we don't worry too much about that for now, but just remember that's where you find the render mode for a canvas. It's in the inspector. And finally, once we've got the canvas, you'll have inside of it a text element. So that's the text element, the element that actually has the text in it. Now you can move it around with your mouse as you would a normal object, and you see it has the normal handles with the two arrows to show its position and some text in there. Let's zoom in a little bit to show you the text. So if we zoom in here, we can see that there's a new text. It's all black, it's quite small. Now you'll notice here that the rect transform has now become active, and this is what's quite important about UI elements, is their rect transform. Now you've got standard position, width and height, etc., but it also has things like the anchor and the pivot, which are different concepts kept for UI elements. And there's quite a few options. So if you click this little target area here, the rect transform, you can see quite a few different options about where it will be anchored in the scene. And really, to see what that means, we need to enter UI mode. And UI mode is entered by selecting the fifth button on the top left-hand corner of the Unity editor, or pressing the T key. So if I press the T key, or if I click this button, I will now enter a different mode that lets me view what my canvas is doing. So now we've got this element, and you'll see that its appearance has actually changed quite a bit. It now has a 4 blue dots, the outside, and a blue dot in the middle, and you'll see the blue dot in the middle is the pivot. That's where you're going to be scaling from, and then it has those 4 blue dots so you can change its size and width, etc. You'll also notice that if you drag it around, it'll snap to the center line of your containing canvas. Right? So if I move it around, it'll snap to the center line of the containing canvas with a blue line when it is centered. So that's the pivot. And then the second thing that you'll see in the middle when I've got my element selected is the anchor. That's how the element is anchored. And right now it's anchored to the center of my screen. And what that means is if we rescale the canvas outside, this element will remain in its position relative to the center of the screen. Now there are other options. For example, I could have it at the bottom, and you can see how that's by clicking on the anchor preset. I've anchored it to the bottom, so it'll remain at this distance from the bottom. Or I could have it to the side, but I'm going to keep it at the center. You also have the option of stretching it. So by clicking the stretch option on this anchor selection screen, what this actually means is if my canvas stretches out in the horizontal direction, then so will my text. My text will remain in that proportion compared to the canvas, but it will actually scale with the canvas. Whereas if it's anchored in the middle without stretching, it'll remain with the same dimensions. It'll simply keep its position relative to the center. All right, that's a lot of stuff, and there's also quite a few other options. You can use Shift to select the pivot, change the pivot as you move it, and Alt to set the position. So there's quite a lot of things you can do. You can see that when I select different keys, the actual appearance has changed quite a lot, and you can do quite a lot of things. What I would advise you to do is spend some time playing around with this, playing around with all the presets and all the settings to get familiar with what they mean and how they behave, and what happens when you rescale the canvas, when you change its appearance, with the different settings. So cool, now we've gone over this, it's time for you to play around with it a little bit, but first let's get this new text looking a little bit better. So right now I want it to be in the middle, I do want it to be anchored to the center, and I'm going to change the text to be a welcome message, so we're going to call it welcome to Number Wizard, and let's put some capitals. And I'm going to call my player Puny Human, because I like that. Cool. So welcome to Number Wizard Puny Human. Now we can't really see it here, it's not really big enough. So what am I going to do? I'm going to change the width, the height, the font size. And I can do that by clicking and dragging, and you can see it going up and down. I'm also going to change the color. I think that color isn't great. I'm just going to pick a white that's very bold and bright. You can choose whatever color you want. And I can change the size of my text to make it fit on the screen properly. Here we go. And center it. And there we go. Maybe stretch it a little bit more. There we go. Welcome to Number Wizard Puny Human. Note that I can add a new line if I want to in my text. So, Control Z. If I want to add a new line, I can do. So let's do that now. Here we go. Welcome to Number Wizard Puny Human. That sounds great. And that will do for my title. So cool, that is how you add text and how you scale it and move it around in Unity. Now it is your turn. I want you to, in the same manner as we did just now, add a subtitle prompting the user to make a choice of number. And that's up to you. So just pause the video now and add your subtitle. Okay then, how did it go? This is what I'm going to do. Very same thing. And to add my subtitle, I'm going to select the canvas first because I want to add it to my canvas. I'm going to go Game Object, UI, Text, and you'll notice that the second text component only adds the text because we already have a canvas we're adding to and an event system, and you'll only need one of each. And we'll go over the event system in just a little bit, and I'm going to center this text. Also make it maybe a little orange, maybe something like that. That looks more like, here we go, something like orange. Maybe not that much. Here we go, that's great. So now I've got some new text. I'm going to increase the font size. That looks fine. Stretch it out. That's a bit too big. I don't want it bigger than my title. So how about that? That looks fine. And my prompt is going to be choose a number, not a number, but a number between 1 and 1000 if you there. Here we go. Now I'm going to change that, and notice that if I want to rescale here, you'll see that I'm rescaling and my pivot point is moving because I'm rescaling not relative to my pivot point, but just rescaling relative to the opposite corner. Now if I press the Alt key, I will be rescaling relative to my pivot point. So that's quite a nice trick. If I got my Alt key pressed, you'll see that the rescaling behaves quite differently. So that looks good. Let's center the text. Here we go. And that is how we finish our introduction to adding text to Unity. Now we have a front screen. Let's play it, see what it looks like. Here we go. Pretty much what we expected. I'm going to change the background color of my main camera. I think I would much prefer to have a black background. So let's set it to black. Play it again. And we get what we expect. Great. Now also what we'll notice, let's pause the game again, what we'll notice is the third and final thing that's been added when we created our first text element, and that's the event system. Now the event system is compulsory. You have to have an event system for UI events to work, so if your UI isn't working, double check you've got an event system in your scene and make sure you've not renamed it to something else. So that's the event system, and it's useful because it's basically handling all the events that will be thrown by the UI and triggering the right handlers depending on the actions that occur. So for example, let's say you're on a tablet, the event system will appropriately detect and pass through multi-touch events so that you can know what to do in your game. So that's why we've got the event system, and really the complexity of the event system is something you don't really have to deal with, but if you want to get a little bit more stuff done with it, for example, look at touch input or change different types of input, for example, using a controller, that's when you'll start worrying about the event system. But not for now. For now, we'll just leave it as it is and know that it's compulsory for events to work in our game. So now you'll notice in a lot of circumstances, if you're looking online for tutorials about UI, you'll find this on Unity, Unity GUI called onGUI function that you have to use. And that's the old legacy UI framework. So that's the legacy user interface framework where you had to define everything we just had to do in the editor, but instead of doing it by hand in the editor with all the handles that make it really easy, you had to do everything in code, and you had to draw every element of your UI from your code. So that's the old way of creating GUIs, and you don't really want to use this way anymore. So if you just a heads up, a word of warning, if you find some tutorials online that use that kind of onGUI method or onGUI function, or the GUI.button or GUI.box or rectangle functions, then you don't want to use those. You want to use a new UI system. So that's pretty much it for now. We've pretty much done with our video. I hope it's been useful and interesting, and I hope you've had a chance to play around with the different positioning and scaling modes for UI elements. I will see you very shortly in the next video. Bye for now.